just wrapped up. We just wrapped up our Marriage on the Rock course. That was, I think, 17 episodes where we walked you through the curriculum, and now we want to get started with some topics that we've been wanting to cover. And actually, during the course of the Marriage on the Rock, we've come across these different topics where we've received message and folks asking us to if we'd mind covering or looking into exploring these different topics. So this was one that I wanted to that Lee and I wanted to go over, and it's toxic ex-spouses. Some can be very unhealthy connections, and especially with an ex-spouse, someone that you share a child with. There's dynamics that are at play that can cause, not always, very toxic situations that not only affect your life going forward, but it also affects your current spouse and their kids. So this was based on an article that I written last year, and we wanted to kind of run through it. But did you know who actually needs protection from the toxic ex-spouse? You would assume that it would just be you, but really it's not. It's your current spouse who's often the target of a toxic ex-spouse. It's the children that you share with that ex-spouse. They become a pawn, a tool for control, and believe me that they can become very affected by the negativity and the toxicity from their biological parent. If you have children with your current spouse, they also become targets for the toxic ex-spouse. Your in-laws, there's always that comparison or that memory of, or sometimes there's still the connections that are held with the in-laws and the ex-spouse. And then, shared friends. If you had common friends that are holdovers, a lot of times in the course of a divorce, friends will fall on either side of the aisle. But sometimes for those that remain, they become victim for the toxic ex-spouse. And really, anybody that's still within the shared common circle that you and your ex-spouse may have maneuvered within. It could be work, it could be associates, it could be church. That's a big one. A lot of women, I forget the numbers, I know Leah knows the numbers, but a lot of women who suffer divorce, and she and the husband may have a regularly attended church. They a lot of times the woman is looked down upon. She's the one that's cast aside. She loses the relationships, and more often than not, and like I said, Leah knows the numbers. They'll disappear from that church, and a lot of times they may not even resurface at another church for an extended period of time. So these are some of the effects, and these are the people that are most adversely affected by a toxic ex-spouse. So we've talked about it. We should have maybe started with what is a toxic ex-spouse. And it's more than just a person who gets upset on occasion because maybe visitation was late or there was a disagreement over expenses. I mean, that's humanity. That's human. Visitation, you may not, maybe you're late for work or you just can't get there on time. Yeah, of course, it's natural to get upset over that circumstance. But that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about a toxic ex-spouse. We're talking about a chronic, strategic, and relentless effort in their pursuit for reclaiming control. And oftentimes, when you remarry, it launches that toxicity into overdrive. But with toxic ex-spouses, it's emotionally draining. It is never ending. Like I said, it's tireless. It's relentless. It damages your self-esteem. It's that whether you've remarried or you're single after your divorce, it's just that constant ridicule, a lot of the reasons that you divorced continue into a situation where you're not even connected to this person anymore other than the child that you share. But just the relentless attacks on your spirit, on your personal being. It makes you feel it damages your self-control, self-esteem, and then it makes you feel insecure. Words have power, and we talk about that all the time. And even if it's from an ex-spouse, it's still someone that you shared a relationship with. It's someone that you still share a child with, and that consistent relentless attack on your character, on your spirit. Because listen, all those things, all those ties that made this intimate connection with your now ex-spouse. This person knows you probably almost better than anybody, and they know what buttons to push. During a divorce, separation, a lot of these things would have come to light. Maybe they're deficiencies in your character, or their wounds that your ex-spouse knows are still open, and that you're vulnerable to. Well, who's in a position to start pushing those buttons and putting salt in the wounds? That's the ex-spouse. And of course, what better way to reopen wounds, or as we call scar scraping, where you're starting to heal, you're starting to grow fresh skin, you're starting to recover, and it's a constant scraping. It's a constant scraping and reopening of those wounds. And we liken it to a burn victim, where the only way that they're going to recover is through a very painful process of continuing to scrape those scars. And a lot of times that's where the toxic ex-spouse is skilled, because they know what hurts you, they know where you're weak, and they monopolize on it. They're the button pushers. So that's I guess where the toxic ex-spouse derives their power, is that they know you intimately. You've got a past, you've got a connection, and now that connection or past is broken, and then, or maybe because you've remarried and moved on, the level of toxicity rises. So some of the things that you've got to do to protect, let's say, your spouse, your current spouse, you have to inform them. We carry a lot of baggage. We all got our secrets, and of course, when we go into a new relationship, everybody wants to go in fresh, and it's a reset. We were talking about that big red reset button, and and part of the recovery process from divorce is that chance at a new romance, a new love, a second chance. By the grace of God, we're allowed, or we're graced mercifully with a second chance. But a lot of times we go into that thinking, well, the things that were bad the first time, I'm just going to leave them out the second time. Well, guess what? You can't. You've got to be transparent. You've got to come open with your spouse, your new spouse. And of course, the most detrimental thing that you want to do is have to admit that you've had this failed relationship, and a relationship that lingers, and that there's, like I said, there's toxicity with it. So the first thing, you've got to inform your current spouse. So some of the things that you've got to tell them. We talked about this before. The amount of child support that you pay. We talked about that in financial management. That is one of the foundational laws of marriage, is the law of possession, and everything that you have is shared between the two of you, and be it your money, be it your kids, be it your debt, your good news, your bad news. That's the law of possession. That's one of the 4 foundational laws of marriage. Money's one of the big kickers, especially on your second or third marriage. It's kids and it's cash, and so if there's an ex-spouse that's causing problems, grief, and then there's money that compounds on top of it, this is why second divorces end 62% of the time, and second marriages and third marriages end 74% of the time. It's because we don't come clean. It's because we think we get a refresh, a restart, without a retelling or a rehashing of the past, and that doesn't work. The other thing you've got to share with your spouse are if there's any conditions or restriction of custody agreement. There's nothing like starting a new family, and then you've got plans, you've got vacation, you've got dreams or goals, and well, you know what? Guess what? You can't move out of town. You can't move out of state. There's restrictions in that custody agreement that are going to prohibit or limit your new restart, your new remarriage. So before you get married, these are things that have got to be talked about. The other thing is were there ever any criminal action alleged or charged or convicted on the part of either spouse? If there's any legitimate mental health issues. Everybody, they use, oh, well, so-and-so's crazy, or why did y'all divorce? Because they were crazy, or they were this and that. But if it's a legitimate, and this is the time where honest communication is so critical. And and it's got to be more than name calling. It's got to be more than just ridiculing somebody for the sake of you saving face. And also, if there's patterns of threatening language or behavior, again, I mentioned fatal attraction. I just picture that scene with the rabbit in the on the stove. For your spouse to be confronted by someone other than you, to be advised, it's absolutely not acceptable. So I'm just going to read off some of the notes, and it just says, talking about all around poison. They can become a source of strife for your marriage and lead and directly lead to divorce. And a lot of marriage counseling, they actually provide some tips and tools for coping with the ex-spouse, not just for you, but also for your current spouse. And sometimes you may feel like you want to retaliate, like you want to strike out. You wish harm, you wish evil. I want to read from Romans 12:21. It says, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." And we talk a lot about forgiveness, and it is critical when and I know it's almost feels almost impossible when your ex-spouse continues and continues and continues. And like I said, it is a relentless pursuit to do harm, to do damage, to take control. And it's not that they necessarily want you back. It's just that they don't want you moving forward. They don't want you to have a life with someone else. They don't want you to have a decent life alone. It's control. And that's where a lot of the toxic nature comes from, is control. And they've lost that control. We talked about it before, where most folks grow up with at least one dominant parent. And not just dominating the kids, but dominating the other spouse, which often leads to divorce. So this is where it's so important, where it's easy to, if a grenade's lobbed your way, to lob a bigger grenade back until they continue. But all you're doing is you're pulling your attention away from your spouse, the gift that God graced you with. And if you look at your spouse, and God's allowed you to enter into a second marriage or a third marriage, and the way you treat that spouse, that's your gift. And it's a direct reflection on the way you feel about the gift giver. So if you say, oh, my spouse, my husband, my wife, oh, they're a gift from God. Okay, you're right. But the way you treat that gift is a reflection of the way you feel about the gift giver, which is God. So, you can't spend your energy, your effort, your focus, your time lobbing grenades back at your ex-spouse. And this is where forgiveness comes in. And listen, God's very clear about forgiveness. He says, if you don't forgive those who have sinned against you, I won't forgive you. So you're living in an unforgiven state with God, which means there's a separation from God, which means there'll be no blessing, no protection. So it is so important to learn to forgive. Now, we're not saying that you accept or that you agree with or that you condone the actions of your ex-spouse. We're not saying that. We're not saying you let them off the hook. But forgiveness frees you from the offender, from the offense. So if you feel like, well, so and so hurt me and I'm not going to forgive them, all you're doing is keeping yourself tied to that person. They say that who angers you controls you, and that's the same principle. Or who offends you controls you if there's unforgiveness in that relationship. So you really do. You've got to give it to God. You've got to forgive that ex-spouse. even if it's continuing, if they don't pay child support on time. You've got to forgive them for that. Now, I'm not saying you release them of the obligation of child support. What do? You file a court order, you go to the district attorney to enforce child support. But I'm talking about a spiritual forgiveness. I'm not saying, hey, it's okay that you don't pay. I forgive you. No. You still have financial obligations that are going to be met. But for you to hold a spiritual grudge, a spiritual angst, you've got discord in your spirit over that. That's where their toxicity poisons you. So you've got to forgive them, and a continuing forgiveness. Again, forgiving doesn't mean I agree with what you're doing to me. Forgiving doesn't mean, hey, we're getting back in a relationship. Not at all. Forgiveness gives you the power, the authority, the control to say, this is the level of relationship that we're going to have. It could be a restoration, it could be a reconciliation, and it could be absolutely zero contact. But when you forgive that person, as God commands you to do, you take authority over that relationship with that person. And you've got to be in a constant posture of forgiving your ex-spouse. Otherwise, the toxicity builds inside your spirit. Now, there's 3 types of toxicity. One is the negative, and it's always judgment, and it's always critical. They're always complaining. Nothing is good enough. Everyone else is to blame. Listen, we see it. Look on Facebook, right? Oh, so-and-so's baby daddy, they're not any good, or they were never a good dad, or they were never here, or the mom was always out at the bar. There's always a very critical nature. And that takes a condition on your spirit after a while. You also have the controller, who's overbearing and demanding. They push to get their way through intimidation or manipulation. And there might be threads of this during marriage, but like we said, it turns into hyperdrive when it turns into a divorce situation. And now they've lost control. And then when you remarry, man, that's when it kicks into hyperdrive. So you've got the negative type of ex-spouse that spews toxicity through the constant judgment and critical comments. And then you've got the controller, who's overbearing and demanding. And then you've got the tempter, who influences you to go against your values. I said it a second ago. It's not uncommon for ex-spouses to wind up back in bed. That's when Satan starts whispering in your ear, they really weren't that bad. There was a lot of good about that person. Maybe you were too quick to judge, and a lot, And when are those whispers from Satan the loudest? It's after you've remarried. Why? He doesn't care about getting you back, reconciling with your ex-spouse. He cares about tearing you apart from the gift that God has just given you, the gift of a second chance. So that's when those whispers become loudest. And that's where the tempter in the ex-spouse, that's where they exert their toxicity. They don't care about about your values, your practices, and especially when you enter into a God-centered relationship, which is the only way your marriage is going to work, is when God is placed at the head in the marriage model. And of course, when the ex-spouse sees that, maybe you've started to go to church, maybe you've there's been a salvation experience, maybe you've recommitted to Christ. Well, that's where the tempter is like, oh no, let's see what we can do, and it becomes a very effective tool in creating toxicity. So beware of those 3. Now, some of the tools of the toxic ex-spouse. What we talk about is the secret surveillance mission. Is there an unrealistic expectation for accessing your child? And you think about it. Does the phone ring all the time? Does it ring during mealtime? Does it ring during family time? Does it ring at bedtime? Facebook allows access into your home. When we talk about a secret surveillance mission, that's where FaceTiming, it's a great tool, right? It is a great way for your child to reconnect with their other parent. You get the visual, especially for young kids, It really is. Maybe at your ball game, or they want to share a moment, or just seeing that I say face to face, it's screen to face, but FaceTime, you understand that. But listen, that becomes such a valuable covert surveillance weapon. I mean, what's better, right? Where the ex-spouse can direct the child. Hey, what are y'all watching? Or what's everybody doing? Or did y'all happen to get a new car? Or any of these questions. And next thing you know, the kiddo's walking around the house, complete innocence, right? And the ex-spouse is recording, either technologically or mentally, everything that's being said in that house. The best thing for a toxic ex-spouse is to have their kid in the middle of the family room, or the middle of supper, or the middle of a family interaction when they're on FaceTime, where they can see everybody, they can hear everything going on. That is a direct invasion of you, your current spouse, your spouse, and your family. So you've got to restrict the access to things like FaceTime. We talk about relinquishes control. When the kids are with you, are they under your authority? Another one of the foundational laws of marriage is the law of possession. And everything you have, we've talked about that, everything you have when you enter into that marriage covenant belongs to you and your spouse. And if it's money, if it's kids, if it's cash, if it's debt, new dreams, your hopes, this is to be shared with your spouse. Now, you back? All right. We haven't progressed greatly without you. That's how in need I am of you. And but this is where the toxic ex-spouse refuses to relinquish control. And things like FaceTime, text messaging, and the greatest threat to your current marriage is to know that someone else has a degree of possession, and that being the toxic ex-spouse. So, there's ways to limit that those secret surveillance missions and that attempt to gain control. And I'm going to throw you right in the mix because I've been chatting nonstop.
All right. So I'm just reading from here. Set scheduled times to call. That's a big one.
That's big. Do you think there's any coincidence while the phone rings at supper?
No.
Or at bedtime?
Right.
Yeah,
church time, all of those,
Yeah.
After bedtime, those kind of things.
Yeah.
But do allow, don't ever prohibit your child from, talking with the ex or anything like that.
Right.
But set rules. You want to set boundaries. That's
Right.
the big thing.
And, and we talk about boundaries often. And, a lot of times boundaries are misunderstood. Listen, especially for guys.
Yeah.
They're like, you're not going to rope me in. You're not going to limit me, and you're not going to prohibit blah 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 blah. But boundaries are set to not keep you in, to not restrict you, but boundaries are set to protect you. Right. Fences are built to keep the threats out, and to protect what's within. And so, by setting boundaries, believe us both, you're going to limit a lot of problems. You're going to keep a lot of problems out of your marriage, a lot of strife, and I'm not just talking about you and your spouse talking about limits. You've got to let your ex-spouse know, hey, listen, these are our house rules. Right. I love my spouse. I respect my spouse. I am in a God-centered relationship. And these are the rules that we're gonna set. Right. And and if you've got to go back to court to get those things memorialized in a legal setting, then that's what you've got to do. And if it could just be set, now, and I'm not saying you got to give them they've got to abide by it. But you know what? If you say, hey, we eat supper between 6 and 8, I'd appreciate you not calling. That's our supper and family time. Well, you know what? If they call, then the phone doesn't get answered, and it'll take a couple times and a little bit of strife, and then they'll learn to call it at 5 or maybe 8:30 or something like that. But Leah's right. Don't deny the kid access to their parent, for the sake of rule set to adjust. Right. One of the things about the secret surveillance missions and the refusing to give up control, like she said, schedule call times. Restrict where the kids can sit to FaceTime. Again, it's nothing like, hey, did y'all whatever out back? Did y'all put a pool out back? And there goes Junior walking through the house. Totally proud, totally happy to share. But what does the ex-spouse have? They've now got immediate, direct, live feed video surveillance from inside the enemy's camp, inside their enemy's camp. So what do? You have to restrict where the child can sit. Now, we're not saying a dark closet.
Right. And again, we're reiterating, this is a toxic ex.
Yeah, no.
If you've got a good relationship with an ex, you don't have to worry about these
No,
things. But this is somebody that is out to
strictly
do you
toxic.
harm.
Right.
So,
and that's what you've got to do. Watch. Let's be clear, super clear. This is a toxic ex-spouse. So you really do. And another reason for restricting where they sit, where they have this call, is because not only is your ex-spouse able to live feed, surveil what's on the inside of your house or wherever you are on vacation, but your spouse, your kids, everybody else in that household hears that open speaker. They hear that voice. And listen, and if you don't think the toxic ex-spouse is speaking with the knowledge of knowing everybody can hear and they're planting seeds, you're fooling yourself. And the big thing is protecting your kids, but protecting your spouse. Because, everyone's at supper and here's the ex-spouse and they start, oh, Junior, when your dad and I used to da-da-da, and your dad and all, let me tell you, what do you think your spouse is sitting there? Those are wounds. Those are wounds into their spirit, or they start ridiculing. Well, your daddy never was any good at blah, blah, blah. You've got to protect everybody in your household from that level of toxicity. And if it restricts the kid to sitting here, then those are the rules that you set. And also with that restriction, you got to restrict how long they can stay on the phone. Some of these marathon calls can go on forever. And look, little kids, they're not big on talking. Right. And they'll put the phone down and they play an iPad or whatever. But the toxic ex-spouse is absolutely, that's an open mic.
Right.
That
it's more for them than it is for the child.
Big time. Big time, you nailed it. Yeah. And then we talk about the interrogations.
Yeah. So along the same lines, the toxic ex becomes skilled at extracting information from the child and the parent. And, and the kids, they don't know.
No.
They're just happy to talk to the other spouse or the other parent. But, the toxic ex believes that they're the only one really capable of parenting the child.
Yeah.
And you see that a lot. I want step-by-step itineraries for things, or
right.
I want to know what you're doing every second of every day.
Right.
Look, that's not how custody works.
Right.
Unless you're under a court order with supervised visits, and then you've got some other issues that we're not addressing here.
Right.
But that's not how it works. You are equal parents.
Right. But the toxic ex-spouse believes, because I said, it's about control.
Right.
So the toxic ex-spouse believes they're the only spouse, that they're that kid's only parent.
Right.
You're just you're a babysitter.
Right.
You're a babysitter. And listen,
you're somebody that gets to hang on to them and give them a break for
That's right. And that's the way, because of this toxicity, because of this control, because of this manipulation, the other parent almost sometimes relegates their own self into a position of babysitter. Hey, I'm going so and so for the weekend. Can you keep Junior? Yeah. You've been relegated to no more than an emergency babysitter. Okay.
Right.
So and look, the ex-spouse, the toxic ex-spouse, doesn't just manipulate information, extrapolate information from the child, like Leah said. It's also from you, and you may not realize what's going on. And look, they plant that seed, right? Oh, they're coming over on Friday. Well, Junior wasn't feeling well. Not feeling well. Okay. All through the weekend, what are they doing? How are they feeling? When did they go to bed? When did they wake up? What did they eat? And listen, it is all a masterful manipulation ploy, and you're feeding information and you don't even realize it. Or
look, they say you're going on vacation on Facebook. Well, where are y'all going? What are you doing? What flights are you on? What highways are you traveling?
Right. No, listen.
I mean, and look, And here's the truth of it. It's none of their business.
Right.
When you have the child and you're in possession, I know you talked about
Right.
law of possession, you're not harming the child. This is your child.
Right.
You are not required to give a step-by-step itinerary of what you're doing while you have the child.
It is. It all goes back. It's control.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the toxic ex-spouse, they have no interest in reclaiming you as their spouse.
Right.
It's control.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, and look, they do. They will leave their second chance, the gift that God gave them. And think, like I said, that's when Satan starts whispering, that was a good old boy, or that was a really great girl. Maybe you were too hasty.
Right.
And bam, you try to jump back in the frying pan, and that frying pan doesn't want anything to do with you.
Right.
They've exerted maximum control, and now what? Now you're single.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're divorced again, and then what do they? Then they turn in back to that controller.
It's the same problems you had the
That's
first
right.
time around.
So, sabotage, that's what we're talking about. Sabotage is a big part of it. And a note that I'd written, I know it sounds a lot like a counterterrorism operation. We're talking about secret surveillance and control and sabotage. But listen, that's what it is. It is a spiritual warfare that's being fought against you. And it's done through the guise of we're gonna co-parent. We're going to work as a team to raise Junior. Listen, it can be done. It can be done, but it can only be done when God is the head and boundaries are set and restrictions are put in place.
Right. Yeah, and the boundaries and restrictions, that's exactly right. Your priority is your current family.
Right.
And you've got to protect them, like you said. And, the toxic ex, they do not, the last thing they want you to have is a healthy, godly marriage.
Right.
That's the last thing that they want.
Right.
So just beware of that.
No.
Yeah. And it's not always the goal of the toxic ex to terminate your rights of custodial visitation.
Sound like you said toxic sex.
I know. It's early.
That's a whole nother topic.
Y'all waking up now, though, huh?
Read us up.
Toxic ex to terminate your rights of custodial visitation. Many don't want the added burden.
Right.
They truly don't. When you have a toxic ex, it's not about the kid. Them being toxic is a selfish thing.
It's control.
It's control.
Right.
It's selfish. It has nothing to do with the kid. And they can disguise that till their face is blue. I'm just doing, and that's how they manipulate. I'm just doing what's best for the kid.
Right.
Or that's how they control is to use the kid, because to you, you're like, well, I'll do whatever I need to for the kid.
Right.
And so, it's really being aware is the first thing.
Right. So let's control is the key. So what did you read?
Luke 6:27 through 29. It says, "But I say to you here, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also, and from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either." And that's Luke 26 through 29.
And we talked about forgiveness, and we I said, as soon as I mentioned, I'm like, well, that's going to be a whole show,
Right?
Because that is so important. But again, when you had stepped out, what happens is your ex-spouse will lob a grenade. Maybe it's a want for more child support, or maybe it's a decrease in your visitation time, or whatever. It doesn't matter, right? And then what you do, you lob a grenade back, and then they lob a grenade, and you become so focused on that ex-spouse that your spouse suffers, because they've now been alienated by your attention,
Right.
and your focus, like a 50 caliber gun turret, you've turned
Right.
towards that ex-spouse, and now your attention is where they need your attention to be.
It's
on
exactly where
them.
they want them to be.
That's
yeah.
exactly where they want you to be. It's focused on whether it's lobbing grenades or it's blowing kisses.
Right.
You are focused on the ex-spouse, and they've got you.
Right.
And that's where they want you to be.
No, and I mean, it's so masterful. You're talking about, you've got time with kids, without the kids, for them to constantly be in. Like, they want to make sure that they're a presence in your life.
Good presence, bad presence.
It doesn't
They
matter.
want to be a
Whether
presence.
you have possession of the child, whether you don't have
Right.
possession. They want to make sure that they are always a constant memory and a constant presence
Yeah.
in your new life.
Now, there's
Because
10
then
tips.
it's a lot harder to enjoy
your life.
Your new life,
Right.
you know.
So there's 10 tips on combating,
Right.
coping with the toxic
Right.
ex-spouse.
And the first is just to be sure that you notice your own part of the ongoing conflict.
That's
Look,
that's
and
so
disengage.
important. Yeah. No, you
You
nailed
know.
it.
And that's a B.
Yeah.
And then you should step parents. We use the term step parents, but we don't like it. But you know, the other spouse, you know, they should have a non-threatening posture to the other spouse. But look, if the ex is toxic, it's not going to matter, and it's essential that you know, if they're engaging, if they don't get the reaction that they want from their ex, they're going to start messaging you,
Right.
you know, or texting you, and don't engage, just ignore them. And like in 3 and 4 really kind of go together. You know, it says keep your business meetings impersonal to avoid excessive contact, but that goes along with keeping communication to a minimum. And look, there's no reason at all to have lengthy communication with a
Right.
toxic ex. There's just not. You know, they're gonna text. They're gonna do whatever they can to get a rise out of you because they
To get a response.
To
you're
get a
right.
response.
I mean, you're right. They'll come in sweet,
Uh-huh.
and if sweet don't work, they'll come in angry.
Right.
And if angry
And
don't
you'll
work,
get
they'll
those
come in threatening.
long
And-
all caps texts
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
All cap
but,
text.
You know, but if those messages don't have anything to do with the child's current state,
Right.
or health and safety, not 10 years ago,
Right.
whatever, or not
Remember when.
when's. If it doesn't have to do with present day current child, then it doesn't need a response.
Right.
You know, and responses should be short and to the point.
Right. If you feel like you're obligated, then you need to have a script
Right.
to follow.
And like, and there's a really, if you're in a really desperate situation and it doesn't get better, there's a thing called twohouses.com, which is an app and a thing, and everything can be done within this app from both sets of parents. Minimal communication. You have the kids' schedule, you have their medications, you have teacher
Right.
contacts, doctor contacts. Everything is right there in this hub, and then you're not messing with text messages and
Right.
and all that stuff.
Now, if you can't use the app, which it is a cool app, it says whenever possible, agree with some aspect of what your ex-spouse is suggesting. That's because you're still dealing with a human, and whether they're toxic or not, there's that level of negotiation, the spirit of negotiation. So, you know, if it's, hey, can you pick them up at 5 instead of 7? You know what? If
Right.
you can, do. You know, but don't let that become the pattern, because that's where the toxic ex-spouse
Right.
is going to manipulate that.
Yeah. And remember that for children, choosing sides is, you know, you're both their equal parent.
Right.
And they love both of you. So don't make them choose sides, or don't try to get them to choose sides. They're not going to do it. And then forgiveness. I know
Yeah,
you
we've
touched
talked
on that
about it,
already,
yeah.
but Matthew 6:15 says, "But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses."
And that's important.
And not only forgiveness, but blessing.
Yes.
That's-
Blessing.
And that is sometimes really hard to do.
And I'm going to bless you
Thank you.
with breakfast later.
Oh,
You're
I like
welcome.
that kind of blessing.
You're welcome. So, you know, and let's be super clear, because I think we've probably said toxic ex-spouse about 1,000 times, but it is so important to have that understand that we're not just talking about, you know, hey, two folks that you know, they divorced and they're working together, or even if they can't stand each other, they're still respectful of the custodial agreement, and they're respectful of the child. We're talking about true toxicity, the relentless, unending, you know, no holds barred ex-spouse that is out to control, contain, and absolutely destroy you if they can. This is what we're talking about. And so you're like, well, some of these measures seem extreme, you know. It's not. These are extreme times, you know. And you're looking at protecting your kids with the ex-spouse, the kids with your current spouse, and most importantly, your spouse.
Right.
We thank you. I apologize for you being subjected to me by myself.
Oh, no.
I cannot be accountable for what I may have said.
Pray for our daughter.
Yeah.
She needs your prayers. She's a little sick this morning.
So we do, guys. These are practical tips and biblical based advice for protecting your relationship with your spouse, with your kids, and also, you know, you may just keep your toxic ex-spouse from getting themselves in a batch of trouble. So listen, we thank you, and we pray for y'all, And we ask that you share this with someone in need, and we ask that you pray for us and pray for our ministry. So we thank you. Have a fantastic day, and God bless you.